And so I went through a guided ketamine therapy session, and there was one session I came out of it. I did like an eight kind of series, and there was something that came out of it that I was like, something about wild woman. Like I had been suppressing my wild woman. I guess like that good girl conditioning can that come into play with like, I guess, the religious trauma?
Oh, absolutely. The purity culture, especially more of the Southern Baptist, fundamentalist, evangelical belief systems, and the way that the purity culture was really pushing like the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. Like, there was such I don't know if you experienced this but the purity rings and the purity necklace and like all of those things are going to impact your view of yourself as a female and your own sexuality.
I didn't personally, but I do recall some peers growing up that were like saving themselves for marriage. And I just kind of knew I would have always been a rebel. So I was like, that ain't for me. I might hide it from you.
Yeah. Like, I'm going to hide it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I don't feel, it wasn't talked about. I had to watch Scrambled Skinamax or HBO, listen for footsteps down the hallway. So it was very much like hear information about it from an older boy on the bus. Like, is that the way to discover masturbation and then hide it or self-pleasure in some ways? Like, so it's very like formative. And I was curious about like a potential overactive response and an underactive response and how one even begins to unpack that either solo or with a practitioner too.
I think that, I'm not 100% clear on the research of why this happens. I may have at one point and I've since forgotten, but that does tend to be the case, that if someone will remain very strict in adherence in their faith and some will really rebel against their parents and their upbringing, that it does tend to be those two extremes that happen. I personally, with the clients that I've worked with, I don't think either one of those extremes is necessarily authentic to the person. They're both kind of a reaction or the effect, like this happened, so now I do this. So it's like working with people, let's help you unpack who you actually are and how you really feel and what your values and morals are regarding your own sexuality and sex.
Yeah. So it sounds like a very explorative process. Are there any questions that you suggest starting with, like in that realm?
Yes. So I would definitely suggest that when you have a specific feeling or thought come up around sex or sexuality, ask yourself where that came from. That first level of like, well, this is, like we can even say monogamy is the only way to have a relationship, right? Well, why do you believe that? Where did that come from? Who told you that? Where was this modeled? How did you learn this? Then it's like, once you kind of do that, then you kind of discuss, okay, does this actually make sense for me? Why does it make sense for me? How do I practice this? And I'm not saying whether it is or isn't right for the person, but it's just a matter of like understanding self. Because I think that there's a pattern of how to participate in sexuality and sex and relationships. It doesn't really work for a lot of people, but no one's discussing it. They're just, this is the way you're supposed to do it. Right. And it's harmful in the end of the day.
Yeah, living lives by other people's rules that you may or may not have known that you took on.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't know it.
Yeah. No, I feel very lucky that at an early age, my stepdad, I asked something about, at one point we weren't going to church anymore. I was like, why are we not going? And he pulled up this map of religion on the screen and he's like, you likely only believe what you grew up around. And then it was like a big, like, if I only believe what I grew up around and this pertains to religion, then what else does that pertain to? Like everything. And so, which I guess, that can be scary or fear inducing in some ways if like everything you've ever believed is suddenly like challenged, but it also could be open and, and something to explore in an adventurous kind of way.
And it's very, very scary. Right? And I think that's why we'll see, especially in more of a fundamentalist belief system, that everything has to line up perfectly. Like, even if you have to fight something that is very clearly a thing, like the earth is older than 160 years old. But it's like, no, we're going to do whatever we can to show you that that's not true. I don't know what that has to do with God exactly, but I know that it's like, well, the Bible says this, so this must be, and it's like if one thing falls apart, everything falls apart. And I could see how that could be very scary.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But with that being said, life begins at the edge of your comfort zone, as Walsh would say, right? So it's like, go ahead and like, don't be afraid to start to question things. It's not easy. And maybe, you need to do it with a therapist or friends or support, which is understandable. But I think you will find happier, more peaceful existence. It's authentic,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think authenticity is so key, something I value. I think my therapist mentioned in a session one time, she's like, I'm not saying, not saying this exactly, but she's brought up like high masking autism in women. And I was like, okay, interesting. Like, and I think she was even like referencing herself potentially, but it just definitely like, I definitely resonated because there was a clear distinction in a moment in my life where I was like, okay, well, this is an opportunity to be a new me, or be one that is liked, loved, and accepted. And I guess whenever that good girl defaulted, I had defaulted to like that neural pathway set. And so, and then had to create some new ones for my wild woman that I'm unleashing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And like you said, it's a neural pathway. So something may feel right to you, but it doesn't necessarily make it right. Like we have to, it's difficult. We have to kind of look like, how is this behavior serving me, serving others, positives and negatives here? If I can look at this kind of objectively, what does it actually look like?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because the pathways are very powerful.
Yeah. And like making, like choices based on kind of like gauging the consequences, negative or positive, of like our actions or thoughts or that sort of thing. I know you mentioned monogamy too, and it's something that I would love to touch on as well, because that was like the one and only choice. I didn't even know what polyamory was until I was in college, or that it was an option or open. And I think once I discovered it, there was a lot of freedom within it. And I've kind of vacillated back and forth, and I know some of my listeners have as well, in between, or just like experimenting and trying things on. Like first was like, oh, I've got so much love in my heart to give. Like, how can I expect one person to fulfill all of my needs if I like, men, women, androgynous, anything in the LGBTQ community.
Exactly.
So, and then so I guess the question I have is, I saw something that mentioned in a different thing you were featured on about addressing jealousy and open relating, or if there's any tips for navigating that, or communication if someone is curious about exploring polyamory or open relationships or ethical non-monogamy.
Sure. So if you're interested, I'd like to tackle that one first. It's really important to understand why. And I'm not placing a judgment on why someone chooses, but if you're in a relationship that you want to stay in, and you're approaching opening up your relationship because there's something wrong in the relationship you're in, I would suggest not opening up your relationship at that point, because it's not really going to help your relationship. If you're trying to fix something internally. Now, that also means that there might be other situations where maybe you want to open up your relationship because let's say you have like no sex drive and your partner has a very high sex drive. Maybe you're like, let's talk about what this look like, so we're both getting our needs met. That's different, right? Than like the inability to communicate or feeling unhappy with your partner. So open it up. Does that make sense with the difference?
Oh, for sure. A Tantra teacher of mine the other day mentioned something. She's like, maybe there's a desire that one wants to explore, and one is okay with bringing in a sex worker, or like to have that need met or that desire fulfilled, but doesn't necessarily want to do it themselves. Or, and I can also see how there's like shadowy or challenging aspects for all relating. Because I know at one point I questioned, like, okay, do I have commitment issues? Is that why? So I was like, I like to, just try on, look at different lenses and questions. Like, is it the big heart? Is it commitment? Is it
What is it?
Yeah,
Right?
like I think that, goes back to your point on like getting curious about the why or where it's coming from.
And coming back like to that authentically you, like, right, we're given these messages. If you don't do this, this, and this, something is intrinsically wrong with you. You can't keep a relationship. You can't do this. You can't do that. And it's like those messages are really damaging. Obviously, monogamy and the way that we practice it here in the US doesn't work for a lot of people, or there wouldn't be a divorce rate, right? Like something's not working. What I would say is non-monogamy comes in so many different forms. And what I really appreciate about it is you are starting from scratch in a sense. So you can read about different ways people participate in non-monogamy, but you're really formulating what makes sense for you and for your partner, partners, people that you're casually dating, whatever that might look like. The only thing that I would suggest to be able to do is understand your needs and wants, be able to communicate those things clearly. And if you are, this is where I see people get in trouble. There's an assumption that the other person might change their mind about something, and they're not clearly communicating like, well, she says she wants to do this now, but maybe, that will change. If you're feeling that way internally, not good. This is what's being presented to me. This is how I feel. This is how you feel. Does this make sense? Not easy to do. Some of my clients, I had a group for people that were just beginning to open up their relationship. And one of the participants said, this is the most amount of work I've ever had to do on myself. Because she had to understand who she was, what she wanted, how that would actually play out. What are her boundaries? Where does the jealousy coming from? Why is that getting triggered? So there's a lot of moving pieces. It is a lot of work. But I think you have the thing that we don't necessarily realize is there's a really high satisfaction rate when it does work. People feel empowered to exist as themselves authentically.
A lot of liberation.
Yeah.
I do have to say, sometimes my desires or what I want evolves over time.
Yes.
But I can communicate that.
Exactly.
Okay. But I'm like, I do change.
No, but you can communicate. Exactly. That's the key. Like, it's really hard to believe that 15, you feel this way. 25, you feel the exact same way. 35, you feel the exact, like, you're not. You're going to grow. You're going to change. You're going to have different experiences. So if you're just continuously having communication. A friend of mine had a partner, and every Sunday night, they'd see each other once a month for the weekend. And every Sunday when they were wrapping up, they'd sit out together. They'd have coffee. Is this still working for you? What's working? Is there anything not working? What should we talk about? Every time. And they've been together for years. And their relationship does change and evolve. And their other relationships change and evolve too. But everyone's knowing what's going on the whole time.